Okay, get ready for this video because it's going to be a pretty long one since I'm going to be narrating a lot of the student essay for this particular prompt, the 2010 Daylight Savings Time. So in this case, we're going to go step by step to consider how do they exactly synthesize, how do they answer the prompt, what goes into the body paragraphs, and how do you expand on the evidences there? Because for a lot of people, when they do synthesis, they think, wait, I already picked the sources, I put them together, I explained what the source is saying, I summarized it, is that enough? You're halfway there, but there's still a little bit more in terms of the actual synthesis part, which we're going to consider in this essay here. So going through, let's go ahead and consider, this is based on the old rubric of 9 points. So in this case, it's scored an 8, the student essay, but that kind of just equivalates to about a 5.56 range for the modern rubric. So this pretty much still works. So a couple things we're consider in this essay here. Number one, what sort of thesis did they come to? So how are they able to give background or contextualize the intro? Intro paragraph can be super short as long as you talk about daylight savings to some degree. Remember, they always give you introduction in the first page right above the prompt itself. So just make sure you use some of it. You don't have to use all of it because it does become a sort of like copy and pasting, but based on the intro, what were you able to just make reference to, or what can you expand on? What can you make some connections to? If you wanted to use anecdotes, this is the place to do it. And it's not even like anecdotes like your own experiences with daylight savings, but just like observational stuff that you can kind of bring in the prior knowledge portion. So in this case, our second question is in the body paragraphs. What topic sentences did they create to support the thesis? Their wording. So remember, this is kind of a more complicated question altogether. So it asks you to both evaluate and also to make a suggestion for the most part regarding daylight savings. So this is the tough part where your topic sentences have to relate back into that, improve those 2 points there. So consider how this student author was able to do that here. So here's a prompt one more time just to kind of recall and remember. Read the following sources, including the introductory information, carefully. Then synthesize at least 3 of the sources into an essay that 1. Evaluates daylight savings time and offers a recommendation about its continued use. So we need to understand instructions, right? It's always confusing when it asks you to like explain, analyze, whatever. Number 1, evaluate. We got to judge it, we got to measure it, pros and cons. This is the part where you're measuring out how DST actually works or not in the context of the sources here. But the second part, recommendation. Criticize, remove some parts of it, an addendum, which means like an added criteria to it, or changes altogether. Obviously, that requires a lot more creativity, so this is where your sophistication point comes in. What kind of recommendation are you going to give us, the reader? So this is the student's actual introductory paragraph. You'll notice I crammed it all into a single slide here, so it's actually not super long. Intro can be super short as a whole, as long as you get to the point, contextualize it enough, and then later have a pretty strong thesis. Remember, the first point that you earn on the rubric itself is that 1 point for thesis, so really as long as your intro gets to the point and has a clear argument, then you're good for the most part here. So, author writes, time is a valuable commodity not meant to be wasted. As such, the issue of time management has come up again and again in countless debates. Ironically, thousands of hours have been spent deciding on how to best use the 24 hours in a single day. In the 20th century, the United States adopted a new program known as daylight savings, which would put clocks back an hour in the fall and forward an hour in the spring. The United States felt that this would help economize energy and better organize a year's time. Unfortunately, these desired effects never materialized. Thesis here. In fact, since its introduction in the 1900s, daylight savings has served as an inconvenience and even as a danger to civilized life. So let's break down what exactly works in the intro paragraph. I made a couple of color marks throughout the entire thing here. Check this out. Wording, diction from the author is super concise. It is a viable commodity, time is, right? Time is valuable. Don't waste it, which DST might do. Time management is what we're talking about in this entire piece here. They even contextualize thousands of hours, 24 hours. They're basically making weight to the entire idea of a single day or what hours really mean when we talk about daylight savings time. They give a little context here in the blue, if you look in the middle, in terms of where it came from, why do we have daylight savings. They're referring to possibly the introduction or source A, but they don't cite it, they don't quote it, they just bring in that knowledge as if it were their own. So check this out. In this essay here, make it your own. Gotta speak like an expert, gotta speak like you know your stuff. So in this case here, even though you might have walked in without knowing anything about daylight savings, you have to assume the ethos of someone who does know everything and at least a good handful of information regarding it here. Thesis works. Thesis is basically the idea that, look, it came in the 1900s, it has its intentions, but it's failed because it's inconvenient and also a danger to civilized life. So in this case here, they haven't talked about the whole suggestion or recommendation part, but they definitely have evaluation here. And so throughout their essay, particularly the last paragraph, they're probably going to evaluate it. So this as a whole works quite well as an intro paragraph. I got context, I got a voice from the author, I got strong language in terms of defining time, and a very clear thesis. Boom, checks out, intro paragraph, good. Now, body paragraph 1, we're looking at how they referred to it here, or how they started this entire essay off. Topic sentence. At first, the United States claimed that daylight savings was an energy saver, reducing the amount of energy consumption by the public as they had less time to use energy during daylight or evening time. Source C. So this is kind of a interesting topic sentence because it doesn't really make an argument or point particularly, and it even brings in the source as a reference in the get-go. Can you do that? Of course you can, right? Sources are definitely for you to use in the whole of it, but let's kind of understand what kind of topic sentence they have here. So in this case, we're talking about the US claiming that DST was an energy saver, reduces the amount. So in this case, we're thinking there's probably a counter argument because remember that first wording there, at first. So there's a contrary to this coming up here. So in this case, we'd consider how they work this body paragraph throughout. This proposition, however, could not be further from the truth. The National Bureau of Economic Research conducted a study in 2008 stating that no real energy saving has been recorded from daylight savings. So in this case, they're trying to counter that topic sentence setup, that initial idea, the initial belief. This is pretty much the counter claim set up by them regarding DST from the opposing side. So this is a nice bring in of, sources in contrast to each other, because look, this is from source F, their topic sentence going back 1 is from source C, so they're using sources against each other and also in tangent to make their claims and so forth here. So already we have synthesis being done here. It's not just talking about sources individually per paragraph, it's on the get-go making counters, making relations, making connections, whatever, as many as you can here. Furthermore, they write, in fact, the opposite is true. The study found instead that daylight saving time results in an overall increase in residential electricity demand. So they're quoting some evidence here. They're making some actual factual logos bringing into, this is always nice in terms of the essay here. Argumentative essay, not as easy to do. You have no sources with you. For synthesis, as much as you can. This definitely gives you that, research paper quality where you're bringing in what the language of the text actually has. So this is the next part of it. With people staying home more as a result of having less daylight to move around in, electricity is in more demand for household use. Perhaps in the latter part of the 20th century, electricity needs were not so high and energy consumption was less. But in modern day American life, electricity use skyrockets. With daylight savings in use, the majority of Americans stay at home using more energy than they normally would and wasting more time that could be put to efficient use elsewhere. This is where you can get sophistication because they're considering the sources. Okay, most of the sources here are pretty old school, a lot of like late 1900s, a lot of like early 2000s stuff, but in the context of now, people are using technology way more or electricity way more. So the plans from the past don't really mark up to the modern time. Boom, sophistication, nice analysis from modern standpoints. Body paragraph 2. I'm not going to read the whole thing here, but you get an idea of what they're doing in terms of synthesis essay here. We're just looking at the topic sentence and what they're going to do with it for the most part here. In addition to energy loss, daylight saving also has negative consequences on the human body. Okay, so in the previous paragraph, they talked about how electricity usage going high in modern times, so DST is not really doing its intended purposes, and then okay, furthermore, DST also has consequences on the human body, and you can tell what sources do that for the most part from your own recollections and readings from, the homework and all that there. So in this case, this paragraph's all about defending this point regarding how DST does bad for the body. So, conclusion. We haven't talked about conclusions too much, but in the context of this thesis, it deals with this idea where you have to give a recommendation. So we'll see what kind of recommendation that this author wants to give. They state, daylight savings also stands as a menace to society at large. Along with draining energy and disrupting the human body's rest cycle, it has also been shown to endanger human lives. Source D gives a chart illustrating that a large increase in fatal pedestrian crashes after the change in daylight saving. So in this case, they're adding a little bit more. They're giving more ideas as to why DST is so bad. And then later, at the very end of this chunk here, it writes, hopefully more evidence will come to light that will bring about the end of this dangerous mistake before more energy is needlessly lost and more accidents occur. So not really like a super clear recommendation as to what they want, but they definitely point out enough issues with DST where it's kind of like, hey, hopefully we have some sort of foresight regarding this issue here, and maybe we can deal with that in the future and so forth. So this is a pretty clear essay. A recommendation part probably was what took away that one point, but otherwise, going back, give me a second. Yeah, not really a recommendation as to like changing or getting rid of or whatever. So really the author just gives a really compelling argument in terms of what doesn't work about DST, and maybe a slight recommendation as to just being cognizant and conscious of these issues here. So, this author has a pretty good reading of all the sources to put them together. We've done the same too. We've done the idea of what each source basically contains. We summarized it. So this is kind of our tool in terms of how to put everything together. So we'll see how the author, him or herself, put them all together based on the paragraphs here. So for the first paragraph, they put C with F together. The two quotes they used were, 1, the total electricity savings associated with daylight saving time amounted to about 1% in spring and fall. Daylight savings in source F, DST results in an overall increase in residential electricity demand. So in this case, this seems to be like that counterclaim thing, right? Where it's kind of like, hey, it saves 1%, but does it really? Residential electricity demand went up actually. So in this case, source C and F creates this contrast. Second body paragraph, it largely focused on source E, the general support of how the body is negatively affected by time shifts. So they talked about, largely how our human body is not quite doing well with DST and so forth. In the last paragraph, source D, the shift in time causes higher accidents due to not adjusting to the light differences. So they don't really synthesize too much, but in the first paragraph, they do that particular combination. All the sources translate and transition into each other. That in itself is also a form of synthesis as well. So it doesn't have to be on the body paragraph level as long as it does translate from paragraph to paragraph and paragraph. So this is actually a pretty successful essay in short, but it's pretty short. You'll notice that it's only like 3-4 paragraphs, and the content within each one was really to the point and concise. Can you have a voice in this? Yes. Can you be a little flowery and artistic as you write the paragraphs? Sure, but you want to just make sure you get to the point with the sources and all that. This is really a practice of research paper making and really getting to the point as best as possible.